Spring MVC Introduction. Oh, yeah, Spring MVC Introduction. Okay, so I wasn't sure whether the recording has started or not. So we'll cover these three topics: introduction to Spring MVC. We'll talk about the concept of dispatch servlet. It's a built-in servlet that receives incoming HTTP requests. And context configuration, how you can configure Spring MVC application. And we'll talk about Spring MVC interfaces. Introduction to Spring MVC. What is Spring MVC? So Spring MVC is probably the most popular MVC based web application framework out there that takes advantage of design principles of Spring framework itself, which includes dependency injection, interface driven design, POJO style everywhere, and also test-driven development. So these are the design principles of most modern frameworks anyway, but Spring Framework is the one that really actually take advantage of these things early on. Features of Spring MVC. The first, clear separation of roles. As you're going to see in the remaining hours of the code camp, basically Spring MVC is the collection of functionality or feature, starting with the controller, validator, command object, form object, model object, dispatcher servlet, handler mapping, view resolver, and so on. So basically, each of these roles are captured in the form of interface and set of implementations. And it's pluggable. So if you want to use your own, for example, validator, it's a matter of plugging your own version of validator class. So we're going to actually certainly take a look at how we can plug in our own custom validator. Of course, it comes with Spring MVC comes with a set of validators you can use. Powerful and straightforward configuration. It's very simple to configure Spring MVC application. So pretty much every classes, whether those classes are at the framework level, meaning those are built-in classes coming from Spring MVC itself, or classes that you're going to build, they're all in a form of POJOs, plain old Java objects. Adaptability, non-intrusiveness, and flexibility. So basically, this one example is that adaptability, non-intrusiveness, and flexibility is that if you want to define a controller, basically you create a class, project class, and then use the annotation. In old version of Spring MVC, that wasn't the case. Like a Spring MVC 2, in order to create a controller, you have to actually extend Spring MVC framework class, and that actually kind of tied your implementation with the Spring MVC, so that is not really flexible. Now most modern frameworks use annotation, so the classes are POJOs, and basically annotations are used to specify that particular class is playing the role of a controller and things like that, and makes the testing a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to move to different frameworks if you want to. So today you're using Spring MVC. If you want to move to a different framework tomorrow, it's actually easy to move to a different framework because your classes are not really tied up with the Spring MVC classes. Continuation of the features of Spring MVC. Customization is a big part of Spring Framework. It's very easy to customize all these features we talked about, including data binding, type conversion, and validation. So these are the things that are typically needed to support MVC application. And again, data binding, type conversion, and validations, these are represented by built-in implementations that come with the Spring MVC, but you can customize all these features. Same thing with the handler mapping and view resolution. So we can actually look into all these features in detail moving forward. Flexible model transfer. So basically, whenever you are receiving a request from a client, basically a method in your controller does receive a model object ready to be used for setting what is called the model attribute. Again, we're going to actually look into these things in detail moving forward. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Customizable locale and theme resolution. So again, we are going to see how built-in locale and theme support could be used. And of course, you can actually plug in your own implementation, but in most cases, built-in implementations are sufficient. Spring MVC comes with JSP tag library, known as a Spring tag library, which is a lot more powerful than the regular JSP tags. Important thing is that it does provide now new template technologies such as time leaf and FreeMaker and velocity. So difference between time leaf and FreeMaker and velocity against JSP based the template technology is that JSP, in order to actually see the JSP being displayed, you have to actually deploy the application, because JSP pages need to be converted into servlet code. The problem of that approach is that in typical organizations, you have two different groups of people working on your project. One is the designers who are concerned about the look and feel of the page, and then we have developers, Java developers. That group is us, basically building some business logics, and they want to actually work in parallel, independently. With JSP, it's very difficult for these people to work independently, because there is no way that these designers can actually see the JSP pages using some kind of a tool. Okay? This new technology, new template technology such as the time leaf, let these designers to look and see the result of it, because they are basically HTML pages. They could actually use whatever tools they have, such as Dreamweaver, to see the look and feel of it. So moving forward, these new template technologies is going to be highly recommended over JSP. However, in this code camp, we're going to mostly focus on JSP, because that is still the most widely used template technology. Moving forward, Dispatcher Servlet. So Dispatcher Servlet is a built-in servlet that comes with a Spring MVC, and it plays the role of front controller, meaning it is the one that receives incoming HTTP request, and then it will delegate handling of that request to controller. So controller will handle it, and as part of its handling, it will create a model object. You can think a model object is a key value pair. Those key value pairs are called model attributes in Spring MVC. So those model attributes are created by the controller, and then the view should be able to access those model attributes in their pages. So this page basically talked about what I just said a few seconds ago. So this is the sequence of HTTP request and response handling. So Dispatcher Servlet receives HTTP request, and then it selects the controller based on URL. It will delegate the processing of that request to a method in the controller. So the method is called sometimes a handler method, because it handles the request. And then the handler method within the controller performs a business logic. It typically doesn't do the business logic itself. It typically wants to delegate to a service class. And then as a result of it, a model object gets created. Actually, model attributes are added to the model object, and those model attributes are now visible or accessible in the view. So controller typically returns a logical view, and then a view resolver will actually select the view based on whatever configuration, view resolver configurations you have in your application. And the view gets displayed using this model object, and basically it will see the contents of these model attributes inside a model object. If you want to use XML based configuration, including web.xml, you have to configure this dispatcher servlet in web.xml5. But as you probably know, usage of XML is strongly discouraged moving forward. So you want to configure using Java. We're going to actually use a Spring Boot in this code camp, and in Spring Boot it has what is called the Spring Boot Servlet initializer, and it does actually perform the configuration for you, meaning configuration of dispatcher servlet for you. So we're not going to actually see any XML based configuration in this code camp. Okay, so Spring MVC application context configuration. So you can think of Spring MVC context is basically a collection of all the beans in your application. So typically you want to have a multiple configuration files depending on the features. For example, web configuration might actually include configuration information about the web-based configuration. Data source configuration might actually include configuration on data source configuration or persistence and things like that. You might in fact have a security configuration which contains a bean definitions related to security. So we'll see examples of this moving forward. So as I said before, Spring MVC is basically a set of interfaces and their implementations. And those implementations are called the beans, whether those beans are system level classes or your application level classes. So system level classes, the system level beans support the controllers, meaning these beans they represent controllers, handler mappings, meaning handler mappers, view resolvers, locale resolvers, and theme resolvers, and multipart file resolvers, and handler exception resolvers. And you're going to see all these examples moving forward in the remaining part of this code camp. So in order to support, for example, controller, you have to have some kind of controller being configured. Okay? And typically, as you're going to see in a few minutes, you're going to use the annotation. That annotation will handle the configuration of all these beans for you. So you don't really have to actually individually configure these things. Okay, so ready to use configuration. You could use what is called the enable web MVC with the configuration annotation. Basically, by having enable web MVC, it will configure all these beans for you. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. If you need to customize configuration, you have two different options. One is extending web MVC configure adapter class, or you can create a brand new object of it. Okay, so either option is fine. So let's see an example of this. So if you decide to so this is an example of the usage of enable web MVC. So if you have a configuration file, then you can just add enable web MVC, and then it will basically include web MVC configuration support. Basically, you can think of web MVC configuration support is the set of all these framework level beans. So that's the reason I said you don't have to actually individually configure this bean. Instead, all you have to do is just add enable web MVC in your configuration file, and then it will be set for you. It will be all configured for you. So pretty straightforward. If you decide to customize a configuration, again, you can take advantage of web MVC configuration support class. So all you have to do in this case is extend it. Okay, so this is the case that we extend it, and then whatever customization you can just add it. So we're going to actually see some examples of this one in the code camp. So for now, I just want to actually get you guys exposed to how to configure. Okay? And you don't have to remember all these things. This is a creation of web MVC configure adapter bean. So here we declare the bean, and inside this method we are going to create the brand new web MVC configure adapter object. And here, if we decide to configure our own view controller registry with our own view controller, and then we can do this. Again, don't worry about the key. Don't worry about the what in detail of this code. Okay, so we're going to actually cover all these things in detail moving forward. Just remember there are ways of configuring your Spring MVC application. Okay, Spring MVC. Hold a second. I actually see the message that's Spring MVC interfaces. As I said before, Spring MVC is basically set of interfaces and implementation. So that's the reason it's so easy to plug in your own customized implementation. So interfaces. So these are the key features of Spring MVC, and basically by using interfaces and implementation, modularization or plugin architecture is possible. And of course, Spring MVC comes with a bunch of built-in implementations of these interfaces. And usually, default implementation will be pre-selected for most common cases. So these are design principles of the default over configuration, meaning in most cases the default selected for you. Custom implementations can be created and configured. So that's again the pluggability that we are talking about. So this is how, in fact, Spring Framework itself can be extended and customized. So these are subset of examples of Spring MVC interfaces. Handler mapping interface obviously handles the mapping of incoming HTTP requests to controllers and their handlers. View resolver interface, and its implementations handle the view selection. Okay. Handler exception resolver interface handles the exception. And locale resolver interface and their implementations handle locales based on accept header or cookie, even session. And again, we'll talk about all these things in detail. Okay, so that is basically introduction of Spring MVC. Okay, so let me just